In the summer of 1986, 16-year-old Michelle Ryan was invited by an older man to go on a camping trip into the Sierra National Forest, just south of Yosemite National Park. Russell Welch, known by most as Skip, was a 42-year-old house painter based out of Fresno, California. Skip was often out of work, getting by on his monthly disability checks, leaving him plenty of free time to spend on his mining claims deep in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Since the death of his wife Shannon a year prior due to a drug overdose, he found himself spending more and more time up in the mountains, working on his mining claims, exploring the woods, or just clearing his mind. His energy and curiosity were often augmented by his raging methamphetamine addiction. Michelle was warned about heading off into the woods alone with Skip Welch. Skip's own daughter even warned her that her father had a habit of giving young girls drugs in order to entice them into having sexual relations. Yet Michelle wasn't convinced, as she was so intrigued by his stories of amazing things he had seen out there in the mountains. Eventually, one of Michelle's friends said that if she couldn't talk her out of it, she should at least bring along her boyfriend Sam and their mutual friend Corky. Both men were in their early 30s and would be able to keep Michelle safe if anything were to go wrong. Leaving Fresno, the group of four made their way into the Sierra Nevada National Forest, driving down secluded back roads and logging roads until they made a stop at a little-known trailhead. They followed Skip into the wilderness, to a place Skip referred to as Ghost Canyon. As the group began to set up camp for the night, Skip began speaking a mile a minute about the things he had seen in the surrounding forests. When interviewed later by detectives, Michelle did admit that there may have been some methamphetamine use among the men, and she also suspected that in some point during the night, she may have been slipped LSD or a similar substance, based on what she experienced later on that evening. One of the big reasons Michelle wanted to come out to the forest with Skip in the first place was because of Skip's claims of seeing Sasquatch. He loved to tell stories about the creature, and as the sun set that evening and the shadows began creeping up the canyon, his stories grew wilder and more sinister. Skip claimed that there were colonies of the creatures living up in the mountains. He told the group that he could communicate with them telepathically and that they have taught him many things about their mysterious culture. As the night grew deeper and deeper, the drug-fueled discussions dove even deeper down this crazy rabbit hole. Skip began to tell the group that Bigfoot worshipped women, and that the very canyon they were staying in that night had a presence of spirits and devil gods, and that where they were sleeping had once been the location of human sacrifices. By now, Skip was insisting that every single unexplainable noise and movement was either a Bigfoot, devil god, or other sinister creature. At one point, Michelle's boyfriend Sam was convinced that he had seen glowing eyes in the forest around them, and he began to fire his rifle wildly into the forest. All this talk about worshiping women, spirits, and sacrifices gave Michelle a strange feeling. She thought to herself that if she had fallen asleep that night, she may be taken away and sacrificed herself. As the group dispersed and fell asleep that night, Michelle suddenly awoke, screaming so loud that she awoke everybody in their tents. Later explaining she had a hallucination of a white devil, describing it as 3 foot tall with an ugly face and large, evil eyes. She ran out of her tent as fast as she could, screaming, "He's gonna kill me, he's gonna kill me," running off into the forest. Little did she know, running through the darkness, as she was running straight towards a cliff with a very steep drop-off that if she had fallen off would have most certainly killed her. But suddenly, at the last second, her boyfriend Sam caught up with her and grabbed her right before she fell, certainly saving her life. The following morning, as the group packed up and made their way out of the forest, Michelle quietly thought to herself of what may have happened to her that night had she gone alone into the woods with Skip. The following summer, in early June 1987, Skip happened to convince another 16-year-old named Teresa Bear to go into the mountains with him to search for Bigfoot, just as he had to Michelle. But this time, Teresa Bear would never be seen alive again, and Skip Welch would never be charged with her disappearance or her murder. This is the story of the disappearance of Teresa Bear. To better understand why a 16-year-old girl would agree to run off into the mountains with a creepy old 40-year-old man, we first need to deep dive Teresa Bear's childhood and upbringing. Teresa Ann Bear was born on April 16, 1971 in Fresno, California, to her parents David and Shirley Bear. Little is said about Teresa's father early in life, although he was absent during his firstborn child's birth while he was fighting in the Vietnam War. Teresa's mother, on the other hand, was extremely abusive towards Teresa. When Teresa was only 3 years old, there was an incident where Shirley put Teresa's leg in between the slats on her crib and proceeded to twist her body so far that it broke her leg. And after this, she proceeded to beat Teresa so badly that she had several broken ribs and had to be rushed to the hospital. Teresa had to undergo surgery to fix her leg, and it was at this point that social services stepped in and took Teresa and her two sisters away from the care of David and Shirley and placed them into foster care. This incident also caused David to divorce Shirley, who then moved away to Tucson, Arizona. Teresa's older sister went on to live with her great-grandmother, while Teresa and the younger sister, Vicky, went on to live with a woman they met through the church named Sylvia. Sylvia, who was close to 50 years old at this point, had her hands full with the two girls, but she and her husband were able to provide a stable home for the two young girls. The girls would live with Sylvia and her husband for several years, before being thrown back into chaos when their father, David, decided he wanted custody again. David wanted his daughters back, and with his abusive ex-wife out of the picture, he was awarded custody. David was now married to a woman named Margie, who had two daughters of her own, and just so happened to once be married to David's ex-wife's half-brother, Johnny. Margie also turned out to be extremely abusive towards both Teresa, Vicky, and her own two daughters. Allegedly, Margie was notorious for making herself a meal, then proceeding to lock both the fridge and all the cabinets, and then forcing the four girls to watch her eat the meal to completion before leaving them with nothing to eat. Teresa's younger sister, Vicky, would soon run away, choosing to live her life in the street over living in that abusive household. One summer, Teresa would end up visiting her great-grandmother, and when she arrived, she was described by her older sister as malnourished and dirty. She ended up staying the whole summer, and when the summer ended, she straight up refused to move back home to her father's. And according to some sources, her older sister ended up getting in a fist fight with her dad in order to keep her at her great-grandmother's house. At some point after this incident, David lost complete interest in maintaining custody of Teresa and just moved on with his life. And Teresa lived full-time at her great-grandmother's. And it was at this point that Teresa's uncle Johnny was interested in gaining custody of her. Johnny was well known by Fresno law enforcement. He was known by his nickname Blind Johnny. And according to one story, he lost his eyesight after shooting himself while playing Russian roulette. Well, another version of this story is he ended up trying to shoot himself after a beautiful young woman left him for another man. And yet, other people said he wasn't really blind at all, and he just played up his loss of eyesight story to his advantage. Blind Johnny's interest in Teresa was most likely due to the idea of getting a monthly check from the state for being a foster parent. He had 2 young sons of his own with his current wife, who was rumored to be a prostitute, and also had a 17-year-old girlfriend who would often stay overnight at the house. Blind Johnny would often force Teresa to miss school for days on end to watch his 2 young boys. They lived in a small, filthy apartment, and there were also rumors from her great-grandmother and older sister that she was being sexually abused by her uncle and other people who her uncle knew at the time. Teresa was described as a slow learner and immature at school. At the age of 16, she was just about to finish her freshman year of high school, and given her life of constant abuse, it is easy to understand why she had both fallen behind so far in school and was also primed to be an easy victim and someone easy to take advantage of. In late May 1987, Teresa would tell her friends about her plans of skipping school and going into the mountains with a man she had just met. She described him as kind of weird and pretty old, but super interesting, and that he knew a lot about the mountains. Her friends were dumbfounded when she explained to them that they were going into the mountains to search for Bigfoot. Her friends told her not to do it and it was a bad idea, but Teresa stuck to her guns, explaining that the man knew everything about the legendary creature, and together they were going to go find him. On the morning of June 1st, 1987, Skip had just happened to stop by Blind Johnny's house for a visit, as the 2 were old friends, and he just happened to notice that Teresa was getting ready for school. He made an offer to Blind Johnny that since he was heading that way, that he could just drop Teresa off at school. And not thinking much about it, Blind Johnny accepted. The thing was, this whole interaction was previously planned between Teresa and Skip as a way to meet up and get together that morning. After leaving Blind Johnny's house that morning, the pair would make a quick stop by Skip's daughter's house to make a quick repair to his 1976 Monte Carlo. Sandra, just shy of her 20th birthday, was not surprised at all when her father pulled up to her house that morning with an underage girl. Nor was she shocked when Teresa explained that they were going into the mountains to search for Bigfoot. Sandra bluntly asked Teresa if she did drugs, and Teresa claimed that she did not. Good, Teresa thought. But knowing her father's reputation, she just did not have a good feeling about this. Knowing full well that he had a reputation for getting young girls high and enticing them into doing things that they otherwise might not do. But who is she to interfere? After Skip went to cash his disability check and got his car running right, the 2 were off. Teresa was giddy with excitement now that their adventure could begin. Little did Sandra know, she would be the last person outside of her father to ever see Teresa alive. Later that morning, Blind Johnny would receive a phone call from Teresa's high school wanting to know why she had not arrived at school that morning. Johnny lied to them, claiming that she was at home sick for the day. He would later explain this little white lie, saying that he preferred to handle things himself and didn't want the situation to get out of control. But by that evening, Blind Johnny, who later claimed that he had been calling around all morning trying to figure out where Teresa went, began to get a really bad feeling. He knew Skip had a methamphetamine addiction and was super unstable, especially the amount he talked about Sasquatch. And he started to get the feeling that Teresa might not be safe. It was nearly 9:30 that night before he finally called the Fresno Police Department to report his niece, Teresa Ann Bear, missing. During his initial conversation with detectives, Blind Johnny told them that his niece had left for school that morning with a man named Skip. Blind Johnny then told detectives that he had a girlfriend who might know somebody who knows Skip. This launched detectives down a path littered with underage girls, right around Teresa's age. Detectives interviewed Blind Johnny's girlfriend, Tammy, who was only 17 years old. Tammy lived with her mother, but spent most nights at Blind Johnny's house. Her mother hated it, but seemed to be unable to stop this behavior. Tammy mentioned that Skip was a meth head who called himself some sort of survivalist. He was always talking about the canyons up past Bass Lake. Tammy also mentioned an old girlfriend of Skip's named Michelle and offered to take detectives to go meet her. Michelle denied ever being Skip's girlfriend, just casual acquaintances. She told detectives the story about the strange night camping with Skip and her 2 male friends, and how after that traumatic event she avoided him at all costs. She then told detectives that he had a son and daughter, and took detectives to go to try and meet up with them as well. Detectives were able to locate and speak to both Skip's daughter Sandra and his son Terry. Terry described his father as a speed freak who was losing touch with reality. He was also able to provide his father's birthday and full name, Russell Shelton Welch. Terry told detectives that his father had stopped by the morning of June 1st with a young woman matching Teresa's description. She seemed excited to be out of school and talking about going up into the mountains. Terry then explained to detectives his father's obsession with Bigfoot and that he had several mining claims up high in the Sierras where he had supposedly found Native American burial sites. Using Terry's help, they were able to track down Sandra, who also confirmed the story that her father had stopped by her house the morning of June 1st with Teresa in tow. Sandra also told detectives about the rumors of her father using drugs to entice underage girls into sexual activity with him. Once back at headquarters, detectives discovered Skip had outstanding warrants for both drunk driving and vehicular charges. They then got in contact with the U.S. Forest Service, speaking with a deputy who was very familiar with Skip Welch. The self-proclaimed mountain man had a history of being reported missing himself, having gone into the backcountry on earlier occasions and not returning when expected. The deputy told detectives that he'd recognize him if he ever saw him, and would certainly notify all the other deputies in the area to be on the lookout for Skip. On June 5th, 1987, just 4 days after going into the mountains with Teresa, Skip's brown Monte Carlo would be spotted at a trailer park near the town of North Fork. It would later be explained that Skip had come down from the mountains to visit his friend Dorothy. She would tell authorities how Skip had shown up, extremely upset and possibly high on drugs, talking about a girl that some type of satanic group had gotten control of and had physically changed her into something, all white looking. Skip claimed that they had taken her and she was still up in the mountains. Dorothy at the time had assumed Skip was delusional and did not believe any of his far-fetched tales or even that a girl was up in the mountains. Several days after reporting Teresa missing, Blind Johnny would receive a threatening phone call from a young woman. The young woman would go on to explain that she was being held hostage with a pistol, and that Skip wanted her to tell Blind Johnny that if you continue to make trouble for him, you will have more trouble from him. Even your kids can get hurt. And to tell police that Skip had taken Teresa to school, dropped her off, and some unknown blonde woman had picked Teresa up. 5 days later, Skip was finally located by police while visiting his mother-in-law in Fresno, where he was promptly arrested for his previous drunk driving violation. When police arrived, he seemed to already know why they had come for him, attempting to explain that he had dropped Teresa off at school, and there must be some kind of misunderstanding. Before asking any questions about the disappearance, detectives made a comment to Skip about several people bringing up his interest in Bigfoot, causing Skip to go on a long rant about the topic. Skip told detectives that he had had hundreds of sightings, describing a community of them living in the high Sierras numbering in the hundreds to thousands. He stated that he had a strong relationship with them and that they made themselves readily available to him at a moment's notice. He also hinted to detectives that he had several photographs of them, further trying to back up his claims of Bigfoot being real. When detectives finally asked him about Teresa Bear, Skip insisted that they refer to her as Sam, a nickname he had given her because she reminded him of a runaway girl in a movie he had once seen. At first, Skip's story was that he had driven around with her for a while, and that Teresa used that time to vent to him about problems she was having at home. He proceeded to drop her off at her school, where she was met by an unknown blonde woman. Teresa then told Skip that this blonde woman was a friend who was sure to help her hide out. Skip told detectives that after that he stayed in Fresno and finally heard they were looking for him, thinking he had taken the girl to the mountains. Skip claimed he would never take a young girl up there because of the dangers. The detectives, knowing that his car was seen up in North Fork, easily shot that first story down. After realizing that the detectives knew he was up in the mountains at some point, Skip changed his story a little bit, saying that after he dropped Teresa off at school that day, he went up into the mountains by himself, and that was the reason that his car was spotted up there later that day. It was at this point that detectives brought up that both of his children had stated that he had stopped by both of their houses on the morning of June 1st, and Teresa Bear was with him at both locations. And on top of that, Teresa told both of his children that they were in fact going up into the mountains to look for Bigfoot. Skip's response to this was changing his story yet again, now claiming that while him and Teresa were up in the mountains, that Teresa had run into another woman up in the hillside, and that Teresa decided to just run off with this woman, and that Skip had chased after them and tried to get Teresa, but she was no match for him, and Teresa and this unknown woman just ran off into the sunset together. Detectives at this point decided to change up their tactics, using the opportunity to try to stroke his ego a little bit, saying, "I understand you have been a mountain man most of your life, and that you are a person of great knowledge of the mountains, and that I find it extremely unbelievable that two young girls would be able to evade you in the mountains when you have so much knowledge about the mountains." This comment had an effect on Skip, who then told detectives that he wanted to tell them all the truth, and it would be bigger than life, and he knew that I or anyone else would not believe him. So detectives then asked what he meant by that. And this is Skip's response, verbatim, straight out of the police report. The police report said, "He then continued by stating that he wanted me to know that there were super intelligent beings living in the high Sierras, along with Bigfoot, and that Bigfoot was actually the bodyguard for this super intelligent community of people. These people existed, but he had only made 1 or 2 sightings prior to this occasion. He stated that where Bigfoot was hairy-bodied and approximately 10 to 11 feet tall, these super intelligent beings looked much more human, and they were of superior intelligence." He then continued by stating that the missing person, Teresa Bear, had in fact run off with one of these super intelligent beings, someone who appeared to be female with blonde hair, approximately the same age and size as Teresa. I then noted that during all this conversation, Welch looked me continually straight in the eye and made no emotional indications that would seem to indicate that he believed he was playing a joke or relaying information to me he did not some way believe to be true. He then stated that he knew these individuals would not hurt Teresa, and that he stated that he knew that we would never see her again. He then stated the whole community lived underground, and that they seldom came out, and that they had such a beautiful society that once Sam was in the society that she would not want to come back, especially since she was so abused in her own home that it was much better for her to remain with these people. Following this extremely bizarre statement, detectives asked him to further explain what he had just told them. And Skip doubled down on his story, with him saying, verbatim, out of the police report, Welch mentioned several times about his mind being messed with, somewhat by Bigfoot, and that the mind games that they were playing on him in regards to the incident. I asked him to explain. He then explained that he did in fact search for Sam, Teresa, all that first day, that she was gone, and was unable to find her. As he was preparing to drive through the countryside, as it was getting dark, he found that his car was stuck. After trying to maneuver his car out of that rut that it was stuck in, he looked back, and he states that he observed what appeared to be a man, but not really a man. I asked him to explain. He stated that this was a spirit or some type of devil that was holding his car up off the ground. He stated he was then able to maneuver the car and get loose from this thing that was holding his car in place, and he began to drive out of the mountain area, wanting to get back to North Fork. As he was driving along the dirt road, he stated that he was driving at an extremely high rate of speed. He then felt that there was something in the vehicle with him. Looking through his rearview mirror, he observed what appeared to be the face of a man in the back seat of his car. He became extremely upset and scared. He stated that he could feel that this thing was the devil in his back seat. He turned and physically began to strike at the thing that was in the back seat, and states that he struck through the spirit and hit his knuckles several times on the wooden speaker that was in the back seat of his vehicle. He then showed me his knuckles on his right hand, and I noted that his knuckles were all scraped up with small nicks and scratches. He then stated that those injuries had been much worse at one time, and that they had been healing over the last few days, and that he actually cut himself on the wooden speaker as he was trying to strike through this ghost-typed individual that was in his back seat. Skip told detectives he was able to overcome this spirit by rebuking it in the name of Jesus Christ, and that after this horrifying incident, he drove down to a friend's place in North Fork where he stayed the night. The next day, he went back up into the mountains to try to find Teresa, where he said he spotted her a distance away, running around with the blonde woman she had run off with earlier. Skip stated that he called out to her several times trying to get her back, but Teresa refused and ran out of sight with the blonde woman. Skip reiterated several times that he thought that Teresa, or Sam as he called her, was going to be very happy where she was, because there would be no more abuse that she was receiving at her home. And after this, Skip made an extremely bizarre and alarming statement. Straight out of the police report, he then stated, without any questioning on my part, that if we did in fact find her, we would find that there was no evidence of any sexual abuse by him with the missing person. He then laughed, which was the first emotion that he had shown during the interview, and stated that he had plenty of opportunities to have sex with Teresa, and that she was very willing to have sex with him, but that he was not going to have sex with a young girl because that was not in his nature. The interview then ended with Skip agreeing to bring detectives the following day to the exact campsite where Teresa and him were staying at the night he last saw her run away with the super intelligent being. The following day, Skip brought detectives out into the Sierra Nevada mountains and drove to the exact location where he claimed Teresa and him were camping at the very night she ran off with the super intelligent being. At the inner area of the grove, there was a smoldering fire along with heavy layers of pine needles that appeared to be kind of damp. The burnt area that was smoldering was 3.5 feet wide by 8 feet long. It's described that there were blankets that were put up in a specific formation, and there was a camera, a purse, an off-white bra, a t-shirt, and pictures. So there were pictures of the countryside, pictures of Skip playing the guitar while sitting by what appeared to be a blanket in that grove area, and there were also a bunch of pictures of Teresa. Now, the thing with these pictures is as detectives looked further into them, they could confirm that based on the mountains and the background of where they were at, is that these pictures were not taken at the location of the camp that Skip had taken them to. In fact, they had kind of theorized it could have even been in a valley that was 10, even 20 miles away, based upon the mountains they could see in the background of these photos. So it was very obvious that this campsite had been staged at some point by Skip. Regardless of that finding, there was a huge search and rescue effort of the area of detectives, police, deputies, and a helicopter flying over. The helicopter searching the area for clues of Teresa's whereabouts would spot what appeared to be a blue shirt on a hillside nearby the camp, and that shirt ended up belonging to Skip. And of course, when they went up and physically got a hold of the shirt, they found a bag of meth in the front pocket. So what happens next, to explain it in short, is Skip was arrested for a short period of time, facing charges of child stealing and murder. But leading up to his actual trial date, the prosecutor determined that they did not have enough evidence to move forward with the murder charge. And they were worried that if they ended up charging him with the child stealing or kidnapping charge, that they would not be able to later go back and re-prosecute him for the murder charge because of double jeopardy and whatnot. So just a few days before his trial date for his kidnapping charge, they dropped the case altogether. And their plan was, whenever they found Teresa's body, that they would find Skip again, rearrest him, and charge him with Teresa Bear's murder. But the thing is, Teresa Bear's body has never been found to this day, almost 40 years later. Skip ended up passing away in 1998 at the age of 54, and he never served time for the kidnapping or potential murder of Teresa Bear. Teresa's uncle Johnny also would pass away from cancer in 2008. And that unfortunately is where this case ends. Teresa Bear's case has been cold since the late 1980s, and no evidence of where she went nor her remains have been found to this day. And what happened to her is a complete mystery. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. I know I'm trying something new with this video. I unfortunately was not able to make it out into the field and shoot on location like I love to do. I'm still recovering right now from a shoulder injury I sustained snowboarding. It wasn't anything cool. I slipped and fell getting off a ski lift and tore my rotator cuff, so I've been taking it easy for the last month. But I will be making it back out into the field for you guys to shoot on location again. So don't be worried by this change of format. And yeah, see you on the next one.